Okay, so welcome to the last episode of Crosse Thinkers Podcast. Actually, for season one. So starting from spring, we're going to have season two.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about how to number it. But today we have our guest Nabamita, Dutta, from the Department of Economics, and we will be talking about basically everything related to economics development. Okay, so I know nothing about this area, and we communicated through emails. About several bullet points. So I think the best way to do it is I just go over the bullet points one by one, and then let's see some kind of question. What kind of question comes out of it?
Yeah, if I might just interject, I can give you I can start with an overview. I was just processing some of my thoughts of where, and that will be so maybe going a bit backward. It will go from the last bullet point, and we can move upward. Does that work?
Let's start with this one. So
okay. This is how I start my class too, or traditional economic development started. So economic development, it's in simple terms, it's the betterment of life of people. Is as simple as that, but from all aspects, not just income per capita, GDP per capita, but also what about their access to education, access to healthcare. Do they have freedom of expression? Do they have, what about human rights? What about, then you can bring in group rights of minority groups, women, and then other financial inclusion, so access for everyone. But then again, more the money side, investment, how. So it basically encompasses everything, captures everything. But traditionally it was more measured as GDP growth, growth of income, and that worked, and people thought, oh, and economy is getting better, right?
So it's almost like GDP, unemployment rate, and inflation index. That's three big.
Exactly,
right? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Not going into too much detail, but a lot of it was the plans that were initially the models that were built, economists, how they say it, that, poor countries, they don't have much to invest. So if we find a way to make them invest more, then they will grow, and that will solve all the problem, because that's how it worked after World War II for many of the Western nations, right? So the rebuilding was let's, inject. They could reinvest and the economy could grow. So let's adopt the same model and give it to the Asian countries and African, and it completely failed. It didn't work.
Not a single one?
There are very small success stories, maybe Japan started rebuilding after so basically most of South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, nothing basically worked, so other than very individual success stories, right?
Yep.
So then it started rethinking that maybe this is not the model to follow, what else. Then other factors came in. So for example, they started looking more into maybe health factors are not captured, a basic measure like life expectancy of people, or just literacy rates, if people are literate. So something called Human Development Index, which is called an HDI, it's actually published by the United Nations, that started getting more attention. So they was maybe we can have a weighted index. So GDP is there, but these factors are incorporated. Now let's see how countries do, right? So it got a bit better, moving away from income. Okay, not just focus on income, because a country can grow income per capita wise, but it doesn't capture these aspects, right?
Especially if it only benefits a small group of people.
Exactly.
Right? So
So
GDP goes up,
the average exactly rises. But still, experiences of experiences like India and China, that's even more in recent decades, in the last 30 years and so. So India went through a huge part of let's say liberalization. It liberalized the economy in early 90s, meaning it was very much a controlled economy, not free market at all. Central planning. But there were some aspects of it was not completely central planning, not how it was done in Russia, but it was more control. Foreign investment was hardly allowed, and other aspects. Like, for example, I always joke about this with my students that I grew up with 2 TV channels which were state controlled, right? 2 literally TV channels. And then overnight in the post-liberalization period, there were 50 TV channels.
Same with China.
Yeah, right? So all of that, and then growth, as you know, like for China too, China and India, like they reached really high growth rates, like having 10% growth rate, that's huge.
That's
Like,
crazy.
yeah, right? So, that's what they hit. But what you were talking about, it was like, some group of people, a majority, which is like, we have like the highest population, they didn't benefit as much from globalization. The income inequality started growing bigger. Healthcare, nutrition, all of that was still like really pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
So that got people thinking more and more that maybe economic development is a very complex process. And just even income, healthcare, just HDI doesn't do it. So that's where, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. But that's where one of the Nobel laureate economists, his name is Amartya Sen, his work becomes very important from the 80s, 90s onwards. He tried to focus on, like, typical poverty measures. Poverty is, okay, if you're below a certain income line, right,
Mm-hmm.
which is important, where definitely it gives a good perspective. But he started like making comments like, or started taking his work is like, what can someone do with the income? So, for example, in India, a lot of the landowners, they don't own their land. So they are not technically landowners. The landlords all have their land. It has been leased out because they needed the money. So they work nonstop, but they don't have what is called property rights. So they don't own their land. So that's a huge disinvestment for an economy.
So you don't have capitals.
You don't have capitals, and you
you're
don't
basically a
have
tenant.
and you don't have any incentive to do anything.
Work more.
Yeah, exactly. Like you are just, so even from the growth perspective, that's a problem. So is that freedom? So let's say then that person gets a $10 rise monthly, which is pretty big for India. But what does that mean? So poverty improves, gets lessened, but the person still doesn't have the freedom to do much with that. So he started shifting our attention to more, what can you do with the money is more another way to think about poverty, not just monetary measures of bringing someone out of poverty.
So instead of like government giving them money, you give the opportunity for them to prosper from that money.
Exactly.
Even after that, you don't even have to do anything
Ex-
because with the opportunity, even with $10, $5, $1.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's how exactly. So the technical terms for like the freedom from servitude, freedom from any kind of, not even call it oppression, but like you have the freedom to do whatever. He even thought about, so let's say this is not his example, but I'm saying just to give an example. Let's say you have the head of the household to be a man, which is very common for many of the African countries and stuff, and the woman has no education or very basic, and the child spends a significant time with the mother. So a lot of investment decisions which comes from the mother, but the mother has no say, and the husband blows away all the money in alcohol, the increased income. So again, they have a betterment of poverty, but the money is not being used to make the economy better,
So
not in the next generation.
So this is the way to measure it. Are there any like actions we should take in terms of policy, education, whatever? So yeah.
Yes. So going in that direction, so he focused our attention. So what has become more like, more accepted, which was not accepted for a long time, as in like people were like, is the idea of he coined the term missing women. So Amartya Sen. So the role of gender became more prominent. So missing women is literally, if you look at a Wikipedia definition, it's more, but a simple definition is the number of women and men that should be in a country based on their life expectancy track. Let's say we forecast, like, it's 2019, how many women should be in India 5 years from now, and that is based on the current infrastructure, the life expectancy forecast, and how it has been. So we can make a number, right? We can, and similar for male and females. The males, it always worked. For females, it was very low. So that's what he coined the term missing woman. It's much less than the expected number of females that should be. And what is happening?
So it's almost like we have all these resources, but it seems like women are not using them.
Women are not using them. And also, it's almost like, so a lot of it is, that's where culture comes in. A lot of it is norm prejudices. So for example, in India, it's illegal to determine the sex of your child, right? Because there is a huge son bias. But sex-selective abortion happened for a long time, and it still continues illegally. So you determine what is the sex of the child to be born, and if it is a female, you kill it.
Yeah. Same thing happened in China probably like 30, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But now, with the urbanized
No,
and
it's a-
modernized society, that's
Mhm,
okay.
mhm.
Still in rural areas.
The
That's a
same for
very-
India, exactly,
Even,
exactly.
Even if they see the harsh of like, even if you bring out a male, like it's really difficult for them to live. They still want it.
Yeah. It's the same in India. So there are two. One is that, and the other is even the caring is unequal. So, let's say a kid is born. If it is a male child, let's say both of them are sick, hypothetically, who will be rushed to the hospital first is the male child. So many females die in the process, like very young kids, because they're not given that much importance.
Or even like we only have got money for one kid to go to school.
Exactly. So
Then
dropouts,
no
that
matter
too.
Younger brother, older brother goes to it.
Exactly. So that, I would say it is prominent now, very prominent in the literature, but the role of gender and how that hampers economic development in many ways, like, even in the terms of economic growth, because many people may say, like, you are keeping a lot of the percentage out of the production of the economy. So think about it, that workforce, everything.
Consumptions,
Exactly. How many of them can be entrepreneurs? How many of them can work in formal economy? So even if nothing else, think about it that way, and what are you missing out? So I think people started paying more attention, and it's huge literature now, but it's like sad to think that it's as recent as 30 years maybe.
That's interesting because we think we took so many things for granted, like women have rights.
Mhm.
Actually, that didn't happen until very recent.
Exactly.
First in the Western country, and now actually generally got pushed to Asian countries. Yeah.
And another thing which is being paid attention is the rights are there, are they implemented? So there are many, I think countries have made, if you look up India in pen and paper, it will look great. Like women have a lot of rights now and everything. How many of them are implemented, and how many of them, like in rural areas, it's still very, it's a disaster. Like, equal inheritance of land, for example. So let's say if once you get married, the son gets everything, the daughter almost nothing. It has been changed, that laws have been passed, that it's equal inheritance. Is that actually, does it happen? We don't know.
Tradition, culture now.
Yeah, exactly.
You almost have two track.
It's so sticky too. Like, it's very difficult to change culture, mindsets, what we believe, how we grew up with these norms. And it's
so many generations.
for so many generations, right?
Yeah, it's almost like all the elders will go against that.
Exactly.
No matter which, like 20 years older, 30 years older, 40 years older.
Exactly. And that's also another path of, like the economic development, which it's called something called institutions. So that's actually most of my, so the political economy and economic development, gender, all of that, what I study more is institutions. So institutions was a term coined by economist, he also won the Nobel. It's not like UWL, or not like an office, or not like, this room. It's the constraints we are devising to shape our own actions. So, for example, property rights. Who came up with it? We came up with it. Why? To shape our actions, so that I cannot just take this from here and run. Even so, let's say I successfully do that, but I know there are implications of my action, that you are going to file a complaint. There will be something coming out of that, right? What if there was none? right? Like, how do we handle this? So then it will be a case-to-case basis. If you can catch me, you can. Otherwise, but there is no. So we came up with that this is a property right. This belongs to this university, or this belongs to you. And I know even if I steal it, there are implications of my actions.
So you also the reinforcement too.
Exactly. So that's an example of an institution which was coined by us, which was devised by us to shape our own actions.
Mm-hmm.
And those are called formal institutions because they are written down by law. Like their technical term is codified. But what we were just talking about, culture, informal institutions, those are also institutions because we are following them as if it's constraints divided by us, only it is not written down.
And it doesn't even have an agency.
No, exactly. But I do follow that, I give preference to my son than my daughter based on some beliefs I have. And that's shaping my action, right? What I'm doing, it's just not written down somewhere.
Interesting. So how do you research that? Like, do you propose new policies, actions, or do you just see where it come from? Or
yeah, so I think my research, or a lot of the research, there are two aspects. A lot of our research are more what is called the positive economics. So positive economics says you are stating facts. So as simple as, let's say I collect smoking. If there is a tax on reducing smoking in La Crosse, is the tax, did it work? So it's basically to curb behavior, right? Like, if I smoke a lot, if the tax is placed, maybe I'll smoke less or give up. So what do? You collect pre and post data. You take the data before, after, and you do the statistical analysis and see if it is significant, right? So that's a positive analysis. So a lot of my work, even for culture, again, that data is not questionable. It's just like you have to make a lot of statistical analysis to make sure your results are robust, because these are mainly a lot of dependence on survey data.
Okay, so
but there are
self-reported.
Yes. Okay. So there are biases in there. So the thing is, like, the only way to reduce the measurement error is like you rely on too many, like collected by different experts. And if all of them agrees, then you're like, okay, well, maybe there is something going on there for this country, right? All of them are showing bias towards the son.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, bias towards the daughter in the case of India, right? In a different extent, but they're all statistically meaningful results, right? So that's a way to get around for my kind of research, because I do more macro, which is
meta-analysis.
Sorry.
Do you do meta-analysis with multiple studies?
Yes,
right?
yes,
okay,
yeah. That too, I've done that a little bit, but more. What I mean is like data spanning over country and over time. So like 100 countries over time, right? It's impossible to do a micro study. Like if I'm studying 2 villages, I can collect my own data in India and do, which is very, very popular and gives us very important information. But mine is more macro based, so I have to rely on secondary data, which is already available, collected by. But these are usually very established data set. So like collected by, let's say, the World Bank, the IMF, or other like international organizations. So there is a lot of thought put into it. Even if still there are measurement errors, but not like some random person going and collecting it.
That's the best you can find, right? Best available there.
Exactly.
Couldn't be more scientific.
Exactly. Yep. So to get back to your question, there is this huge data set called European Value Survey. That's the one example. They have tons of questions on people's beliefs. Like there are 100 questions, and they have been collecting data since 1980s. They started with very few countries, maybe 20, 25 countries. Now they have 100 to 120, 30 countries in their sample. It's collected in waves because it's a time-consuming process. So, they can be collecting for the 4 years and then give a break and then maybe come back in a couple of years. But it's pretty still continuous. So there are tons of questions like, what do you feel about women's role in the society? Should they work? But even more specific question, like, should she give up her career to be at home, or should she do both? What do you feel about trusting people? What do you feel about everyone making their own decisions? Things like that. Political affiliations, all of that are asked. So that's one way of doing it.
Interesting. Yeah. So during all your research, I saw you have a lot of publications. Did you find anything surprising or did you find anything that just wow, I didn't know this was happening, but that's super important?
Uh, some of the some of the studies which I'm doing is, for example, so I'm looking at, so for example, if so a little bit of background. So for example, for any women to enter the labor market, right? Meaning if you are going to be employed, I am looking at entrepreneurship like self-employment, but considered either employment or formal employment or starting your own business.
So it's not a wager-based.
Yeah. So that is, it's labor market decisions are dependent on, for a woman, a lot of like marriage, right? Kids, all of that factors. For a man too, but if you think about, well, culture is playing a huge role. Many cultures' expectation is that the women should spend more time. But also, like, just if you think of biologically, like maybe in the earlier months of the baby, the mother needs to be there more than the dad, so all of that. So how does that affect their decision making? And the literature has usually shown that fertility can be a problem, in the sense that if you have more kids, that needs more investment in time for home, right? Like home and child rearing and all of that. Although the recent research is a lot, not doubting it, but saying that the effect may not be that bad because of daycare facilities coming up and all of that. So it may not be that negative. So all of that. But what I was looking at is early marriage. How does that affect? Which is true for still, countries across the world. So if that hinders the decision,
entrepreneurship and working.
Which I found it does, like, negatively affect.
How early are you talking about?
Like, again, this data is some of them I found, I think 14.
Whoa.
Right? 15, but at least the positive part is this huge data set. This is like 300,000 observations. That the lowest quartile of which is was very less observations. So it's getting better, but it was still pretty low, right?
Okay, yeah.
The mean is still around 21 to 25, So but what I was expecting is, with cultural norms, which let's term progressive for the time being, we can give other terms, but more like, which value hard work for everyone, which doesn't, which there is something called individualism, which is more Western countries are considered individualistic. Like, you just like, oh, I make my decisions, hard work is rewarded, achievement is rewarded, all of that. If that negates the effect, right? Like, if with that, maybe then the marriage impact doesn't matter. If a society is more individualistic, most likely the marriage age will also go up, and maybe the negative impact
Once
will
they go up, you mean they marry older?
Well, because they will realize maybe, right, like the importance of, like, I don't have to.
They kind of interact with each other.
Exactly.
If you have a career, it tends to actually marry
Exactly. What I found, I'm thinking I was not too shocked, but I found that the negative effect goes down. Like, females are still less likely to be an entrepreneur, self-employed than man. This is based on the worldwide data. So I'm not talking about country specific. I'm talking about all the samples I have over the years. So again, a specific country can have very different results, specific period of time. Women are still less likely. And I thought with this cultural norms, with that, maybe the effect will totally go away. Like, even if they are marrying early or something. I found that no, the negativity goes down. So, but it never becomes positive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So the probability doesn't never turn positive. It's just that magnitude keeps going down.
So the more, is it fair for me to say, like, the more individualism you have,
Mm-hmm.
the bigger the chance or the bigger the probability women becomes an entrepreneur, or bigger proportion?
Yes, or they have the likelihood, low likelihood becomes less low because it still doesn't become positive, right? So we cannot say that the probability goes up because it is still goes down, but it goes down at a lesser rate.
So like a smaller negative impact.
Yeah,
on their
exactly.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, but if you're thinking about make it positive, then probably another thing to think about is actually the biological factors between genders. Right? Maybe mine just in general.
No,
in
I know.
Right.
Yeah. Always a lot of like. So that's where the gender role comes in. Recent studies have also are showing like there is this study by it's looks at individualism, and they consider different measures of gender inequality or equality, which is like, I'm forgetting what, like, but educational differences and stuffs like that. I'm exactly forgetting what those measures are, but they found that greater individualism lowers gender inequality because, and I guess the biggest explanation there was like because everyone is treated as an individual, and gender doesn't come into play. So those cultural norms are pushed back a little bit.
Interesting. So, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Okay. So what about so you look at entrepreneurship. What do you mean by political economy?
Okay. So one of the areas, there are several. I'm going to just focus on the ones I have more worked with or know about. Remember we were talking about how the Western world tried to help the rest of it after post-World War II.
Yep.
And one of the models that came up was giving foreign aid. So, the Western world sends money because that's how they figured that they don't have much savings, which savings essentially turn into investment. But we're talking about country-wise savings, like people keeping money in their banks, and that it gets rolled out to loans. So, you are multiplying that money, that essentially channelizing into investment. That's what they missed. So if we give them foreign aid, that gap will be filled, and then they can have the investment, and that will lead to growth, right? Well, it didn't work out. Again, very individual success stories, some East Asian countries, but most of the money was wasted. A lot of corruption because just a few people got millions of maybe dollars, euros, whatever, and then they got rich, but it was a public resource, and it was not used for the greater masses, right? So that, and then again, I mean, it's still a very controversial literature. I work on that, like what exactly, we don't know the answer. It frustrates my students, like I cannot give them the answer at the end of the class. I was like, because that's how research works. Like
especially in economics, right?
Economics,
it's complicated.
Everything's
intercorrelated.
Yeah, and it keeps changing, moving. And I was like, but then what do you do if you are negating the study? I'm like, every study adds to it's like an ocean. It adds to the drop in the ocean, but it keeps moving. We don't know the end because we keep learning. It's like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's look at. So that's how it's a complex process. It totally frustrates them. They want an answer.
If I was hired to consult for a country, I would tell you exactly 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. So what the literature came up with. So now what I think has been shown definitely to work is more micro aid. So let's say I give money to India to build a school in that village because it can be monitored better. It can be a
micro. That will be like money-wise and also spatial-wise, right? You don't see a country as a whole.
No.
Individual
locations, and that's school was that built. So we can be, there is accountability. We can see exactly the result. So that kind of aid, or this money was grown to boost female enrollment in this village. So we can keep track of it rather than throwing it millions of dollars at a country in like Rwanda in Africa, and then who knows what happens, right? It's very hard. But the literature has been pretty divided. A lot of the dominant literature is this initial foreign aid showing it didn't work at all. Not about just growth, for no development outcome. It helped. A few studies do show that there are these individual success stories, and then they have tried to generalize that it would have worked if we continued. So there is the debate there. Then a middle ground started happening. That's where the political economy comes. they start saying like maybe you give money to country A, you give money to country B, the same amount, right? Maybe it's dependent on what kind of policies do those countries follow and the institutions we were talking about. So if they have institutions in place which can help the money to go in the direction it needs, you have a judiciary in power, you have proper checks and balances, the government cannot appropriate it, likewise the big business doesn't take it away. So then maybe it will be channelized in the proper way because you have those framework to make it work. If you don't, so it's not. So I think the focus tried to shift from like it's not all good or all bad. It depends on whom you're giving.
So there are further factors you should investigate.
Exactly.
What are the key factors to use the money in the right place?
Exactly.
Are there any conclusions or findings?
Yes. So there are some is usually, but democratic institutions tend to be more better at dealing with it. Autocratic institutions tend to be more expropriating or take it away or keep themselves just in power because they can mute the voice to some extent. But then the research progressed more just democracy, not as a whole, but what aspects of democracies. So the checks and balances have been shown to be an important factor. Accountability, transparency, these can make the work. The other one which has been shown important is called economic institutions. So basically property rights. If everyone can do business, not big business, but this is more like in general business climate, like you don't need thousands of paperwork to open a business.
Yeah. I read a book about secret of capitals. It's really narrowed down to how fast you can change your capital.
To
make it an investment and start to grow.
And many people, many poor people have amazing ideas, right? They just get burdened and then they never can get there. That's where corruption comes into. For India, that's for true, that you try to bribe your way and get there. Exactly. So that has been shown if there is less interference like that, that can help. Other factors like, what else? Like if there is a accountability in terms of the legal system. So things like, so those are more economic institutions. The political ones will be more the democracy, those aspects like the voting rights and all of that. So all of those have been shown to have a positive impact, but it really still depends, many times on the countries, like, how countries are using it and all of that.
It's more factors, but still you have to have culture and all the big ocean to dive into.
And another part, which the political economy, I haven't worked in that, but I just edited a book. And so, on foreign aid, and that's some of the contributing chapters were based on donors. So the donors' interest in donating foreign aid, huge literature. So the likelihood giving money to ex-colonies, the likelihood of giving foreign aid to trading partners, the likelihood of giving foreign aid to political affiliations. So if I am more capitalist, I will give monies where I can promote more capitalism and not to others, even if they need it. So all of that plays a huge role too. So from the donor side, not from the recipient side. So this is the other literature, that how much donor politics play a role in motivating the flow of foreign aid. So that's where political economy plays a huge role.
That's interesting because you need to factor in the international aspect of it, right? It's not like I give the money to one country and two countries. They're totally identical in all the factors you talked about. But one is in Africa, one is in Asia.
Exactly.
Then you need to factor in all the countries around you.
The
strategies people are taking.
Exactly.
So it's really complicated.
Yeah.
I almost feel like this is something they need to figure out by themselves because there's no framework will always work.
That there is some economists also believe that many times give them the assistance. If it is a very poor country, give them assistance, maybe give them some money, get them started. But often what World Bank does is it dictates. So I'm going to give you money, but I'm going to dictate how exactly, what are you going to do? And they don't have that. It's always grassroots, right? Like if I'm the farmer, I know how the land works. If I am the business owner of my small store on the roadside, I know how if you come with your assistance, Well, it's very top down. You're coming from sitting there in the US or Europe. How do you know? Right? So be with us. It's a very tough balance, but no, don't dictate us what to do. Exactly.
That makes sense because the environments are different.
Yeah.
And here, maybe different type of industry will interact
Yeah.
compared to what's in the developed country.
Exactly.
Right?
And then, things like the level of corruption, the level of bureaucracy, level of like how things work in the government, they know that.
Yeah, I've seen this so many times back at China. If you actually really give them a specific usage of the grant, usually they just waste it. They're just like, hey, I still have 2,000 left. But I don't know where else I can use it. So let's just build a better building, even though I don't need it.
Right,
It's only
right.
for that.
Right. Like, when I go back to India, for many of from my friends or just, people I know. So here, I'm sure that to some extent that's true in China too. Here, like, if you want to get something that you send an email and it works, right? Like in most, India, never. It's always the capital is in the terms of like social capital.
Yeah.
So you pick up the phone, you chat with the person a little bit, and then eventually maybe the work will get done. But that's the way, like you send an email or like, no, there's no way that's going to happen.
They don't put a clear boundary on accountability, responsibility, and everything. So it's almost sometimes it's a personal decision, like I want to give you this or not.
Right.
And then again, bribes, corruptions, and just keep coming. I think in China it's actually very different because we have two type of society. I would say at least two types. It's one of the more traditional rural, not developed area. Still want to do things in the traditional way. I know your father. Then not right. And the other way is more about like the modernized city. It's more and more like Western. And you can see everything is rigid. And whenever anything happens, you know clearly who you should email.
Okay.
And if he doesn't reply, you know clearly who you should report to.
Ah, okay.
So it's kind of like very
very
diverse.
different worlds almost. Yeah. That's interesting. I don't think I knew that much. Like I realized there will be huge difference. India also, like the cities are different, but I still feel like a lot of the job gets done via phone, which was very interesting to me. Which I mean, I left India when I was I was still a student, so I never.
When was that? Like how old were you back then?
25.
25, I left India. Okay.
2004. Okay, so I never had to explore that aspect of it. Like, like I never worked in India, right? In that sense. So when I go back, I really see that difference. That, even for my friends who are doing like, they're really in high paid jobs, doing everything, but a lot of it is done by phone.
Interesting.
Does
it even matter? Like maybe they just happen to have phone first instead of email or something like that. So they just pick that one.
I don't know.
Proof like email is better. More
And
advanced than
but
phone,
this
right?
is what you see. Like, see how culture comes. So the culture, I'm pretty sure my dad didn't do it that way because there was no cell phone, right, in that time. So they did it in some different ways, maybe person to person. So even more complicated, right? How did that get from that to the phone? Maybe the cell phone revolution, it happened because suddenly there was like, that has happened in many countries, the cell phone boom, because it was cheaper to give them cell phones than landlines,
Than
right? Laptop, and also like landlines involved a lot of bureaucracy.
Yep.
For I can apply for a line. I don't have a phone still after 10 years, right? But it was easier to break that and give them the cell phone in hand, and they could at least be connected. So yeah, it's interesting how from that personally it went to the phone, and the email was skipped. I don't exactly know why, but that's the culture that is followed. So most people do it.
That's actually really interesting. If you go to an underdeveloped place and suddenly you throw the modern technology, something weird will start to happen.
That's bringing me to an interesting point. There is something called in that institutional literature. I have worked on it a little bit. It's called path dependence. So path dependence is, how do I say it? So let's take an example. Let's say you pass a formal institution, like a law. So from tomorrow, you say in India that everyone has to wear Western outfit. How does it stand now? It's a complete mix, right? So the urban areas, most people will wear Western outfit, but not in rural areas, and not also older generations won't wear it as much. Some will do, some won't. Let's say you pass that formal law. So that will be considered a formal institution. You
If
codify
you
it.
don't do it, you go to jail.
So that depends on how much you want to implement it.
Okay.
It will be, yeah. I mean, there will be some. So like, that's what is most likely expected. You can have a penalty for it. You can do so, but that will be a huge monitoring cost because it's a huge population.
Yep.
So how do you do it? But if you don't put a penalty like that, if people, even then, people will do it very unhappily because the informal institution is not, it's completely out with the formal. So that's what is called path dependency. There is no, it's not following the track, which you were saying, that because older generations still don't know it, the rural people still don't know it, they wear the more traditional outfit. So if you suddenly impose on them, even if it is a law, it's not going to be listened to. Like they will not follow it unless you will have something like that huge penalty, like the huge implication. But then even then, it may not work because the monitoring cost will be too high. It's the same about traffic signals. We give this interesting examples. In India, or many countries, I was listening to this hilarious stand-up comedy, the Trevor Noah.
Uh-huh.
He was in New York, but he was like talking about like, in my country, traffic signs are more like stop is not stop. It's more like stop. It's a suggestion. Like, maybe if you want to think of stopping, stop. So that's how it is in India too. Like, traffic, people break traffic laws all the time. And then there is corruption and you just pass a note and then, yeah. Now, but the laws are the same as here, right? The laws are there and laws are here. But here people abide by. There are many countries, most Europe, but there they don't. So that's where it's a mismatch between informal institutions and formal institutions. People don't feel like they have to listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
So the law is not being able to do it. Now, can you make them do it? But what do? Do you put the whole police force then monitoring every car? That's impossible.
That won't work either, actually, if you try that. It won't work.
Yeah. So that's where, like, we have such examples in society all the time. Like the two institutions don't align. When they align, that's the best outcome.
So the culture is actually playing a big part here because it's not just like one way you treat the traffic law. You also treat everything else in the same attitude, right? I can almost imagine like if you do this in Japan overnight, just pass a new law, everybody will follow. Because not only they follow this, they follow everything.
Right.
Right.
Japan is just exactly. Thank you for giving an example. I remember when I went to Japan, I have heard about it, read about it, but one instance, I suddenly thought, I remember I was going to the university where the conference was, and I thought there was this line or this queue. Everyone is walking in a queue or a line, and I was like, oh, there is something going on, right? What is going on? So I stood and then I figured there was nothing going on. People were just coming out of the subway, and they walk in a line. And I found that incredible. I was like, okay, so in most countries, even here, people just bump into each other. Like, look at New York.
Yeah.
No one walks in, and you will bump in. Not that I'm saying that's what is supposed to be done, but it just shows the extent to which they follow.
It's probability, right? 70% of people will do it. 30% of people will actually just don't care about
Yeah,
it. And then you see some occasionally chaos, but in Japan, it's just like, no. 100%.
Exactly. So that's a cultural mindset, right? And so you impose law, and it's followed immediately.
Next time you go to Japan, actually, you need to pay attention to another thing, which is interesting. That is how they actually, divide different kind of garbage into different trash cans. They probably have 40 different kind of trash cans. You just put every single thing. You take a food and you disassemble them into 5 different type of garbage and throw them into the correct can.
And they are taking the time to do that, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Because you don't do it, you create a burden to the society. The government, and they don't want to do that. They just respect the government, and everybody just want to make sure I do my part.
Exactly.
So that's actually a very interesting culture thing. That's why, like, when I'm back in China, it's always they send people to the Western country, learn the experiences, but then they come back, they localize it. That's what they call for example, capitalism with Chinese feature, or like Chinese localized capitalism, Chinese localized the democracy and everything, because you need to kind of see the alignment between the way people used to do stuff and the more rigorous tested way of doing stuff, right?
Exactly. Do you see a mismatch though? I find sometimes, yes, that happens in India, and I feel like it's the best way to make people like, so did I care about all of that stuff when I grew up? I don't think so necessarily. Like, I'm more aware of way more stuff but that's how human beings grow. But today I will think 1,000 times if we're just throwing a trash on the road, right? But it's also a habit because I have never done that here. And I know it will be embarrassing if I just throw a thing, even if I don't want to do it from my heart. Like, it's just like, oh, should I just, like, after finishing this podcast, should I just throw my coffee there? And how will song look at me or song? So, and then it forms a habit. And then when you go back, you just don't do it. I remember I was walking around with like the gum, wrapped in the paper. Yeah. And I walked around with it for an hour looking for something. And I don't remember who. I think there were some friends of mine. And then I finally I need to throw this. And they were like, what are you talking about? They couldn't even understand because, yes, I have done that too. You just chuck it on the road, right? But I was moving around for it for an hour just out of habit or something like, no, I cannot just throw it on the road.
Up to a certain point, you realize it's actually not right or wrong. It's just like how people do stuff.
Exactly.
Like,
that's what my point. Deal? Yeah.
Depending on where you are. So we have group behavior. We regulate each other's behaviors, right? So depending on where you are, you can actually have this kind. For you and for me, the same thing. It's just two kind of mindset.
Right. Exactly.
You just turn this off and switch that one on once you're in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mismatch is definitely happening. But in China, what's happening is actually, I think the key factor here is education. Like, what kind of TV show are you watching? If you see a Hollywood movie all the time, you see Frozen all the time, and everybody in Frozen with a beautiful looking person, they are actually keeping the gum until they see a trash box and throw them in. Then probably you will follow. See, in China, is actually you can see there is a big gap because China become rich in such a short period.
Yep.
So before I was a kid, it's possible you starve. You just don't have food. You can starve. For now, like, you just have endless food. And endless supply for everything. So you can go to a bus, you see older people comes here, and you can see the younger people actually going to stand up and just, offer the seats to them. But there are some people who are only like 5 years older. They just refuse to do that. They think this is not the right thing to do. So you see those kind of conflict between generations. But I would say, like, a good thing to see is actually with the younger generation. That's where I actually usually look at, because you cannot look at the older people and say, they don't know a thing. They don't behave themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, when they were born, there was nothing.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think it's very important to keep in mind that, because it's hard to change culture. Like, it can get frustrating, but we have to, be aware while even implementing policies, because it's not going to work of how people think and behave. It's just they are going to continue to behave. This is not going to work.
I think a big focus now is actually, I want to cut the corner. Whatever other country has done within the past 200 years, I want to finish in 20 years. Even if you can adjust to that with your economic machine and everything, your mind won't.
Right. Because it's so fast, it's so quick,
If you go and have dinners with people my age, you will find it's crazy. Like, we eat a lot, simply because we starved before. Even though I'm definitely rich enough to not to eat a lot, just in case I don't have time, I don't have money for my dinner. It's just a mindset you could never change. So that's actually a conflict fighting between me and my parents. They're even more extreme. It's just like they cannot see anything left in the plate.
Right.
If they order too much, they just eat them all, and then they'll go back and take a pill.
But it also, like that, I think that to some extent happens. I can see a little bit of it. Was also like the waste. They cannot see the waste because they grew up. When you grow up like not having much, or like then you really realize that I cannot waste that grain of rice, or that grain of rice, or that little So
even though eating that thing will harm you, helping me. Right? Before, when you are 20, this thing will actually help you because you don't know where your dinner is.
Exactly.
But now it's going to harm you, but they know. Every time I talk with them, I know this is harming me. It's just the mindset I couldn't change.
Very not very different, but a little different. Like, another thing I talk about in class is investment in. So one of the things was, if your income rises, it's one good thing, because we cannot deny the role of income, because even if you deny money is used to buy stuff, so we need money, so we cannot deny the role of money in development, right? But for a while it was thought that if you have the money, then investment in healthcare and education will happen. Right? Because you have the money. You didn't have the money, so you couldn't send your kids to school. But then it was like, no, that was not happening. So cultural norms first play a role. Even if I have the money, maybe I don't send my daughter to school. That. Second, this is very interesting. It has happened to so many countries. Definitely, even in Southeast Asia, like when I was, where was I? Was it Vietnam or somewhere? I saw this line queue in front of KFC, and it was, I think I even took a picture. It was amazing. I was like, so people queue up, like line up, wait for half an hour to buy something from KFC, because that's the thing, right? Like it's the same in India. Like the more westernized brands have been incorporated. Like people love Subways, love all of that. But what has it has done to some extent harm more in the village areas. So the literature is termed empty calories. So you were actually better off without having them. What you were eating, even starving a little bit, but it was more still healthy food. So with the income, you should have gotten more of that food or something else. Maybe get fruits and vegetables. Instead, they got a Coke and a burger.
Yeah, it happened in China a long time ago. Like people would actually put Coke in rice as a sauce, simply because
Wow.
Coke was expensive. Nothing tastes terrible, but they just think, "Wow, this is cool."
Yeah. That is
I got
exactly.
soda in my rice. How great is that?
Wow, they put it in the rice. That's very interesting. But that's exactly in India, and so I talk about it. So not just in India. It has been shown in research in other like African countries. It's like a status thing, but you're harming. So necessarily rising income doesn't translate to better investment in health.
I mean, that's all narrowed down to education. Number one, number two, public relationships, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, how do you define yourself as
Yeah,
an individual?
yeah.
What you buy.
Exactly.
Now, even if you don't, I mean, this actually is happening in China a lot. That is, a lot of classes become super rich, and now a lot of companies just basically do advertisement all day. They say, you need to have this, you need to have that. People will actually just take a loan for a year just to buy a phone in college. Like, why do you want to take a loan for so many years just to buy a phone?
Very interesting. I know that's
But not just that, like all kinds of expensive luxurious brands. Like my friends, for example, they have some younger brothers or younger sisters. They just work their butt off to buy a really expensive purse. And like you're wearing jeans and sneakers, and now you have a very expensive purse here. At least you should have a whole package, right?
Yeah,
With dress and everything.
It's something to stand, like, it's like a status thing in
Yeah.
the, I have that. And I think it's also I don't know, I haven't read much research in the other area. That's where behavioral economics, I think,
Yeah,
comes in
yeah.
a huge role. I think it's also the greater income inequality. So they are trying to make it like, I cannot be there ever, but at least maybe I have an expensive phone that somewhat makes me feel a little better, like close to that person. I think that's
the illusion of having your dream become true.
exactly. We had someone, which is very still unfortunate, is how much is the extent in China? No. India still has domestic help. It is getting lesser and lesser, but in some sense, these people are earning money. It's a combination factor. Like, as it is getting more mechanized, so you have dishwashers, you have washing machines, you have that, then the domestic help is reducing because people are able to do more on their own. But it's still, we have such a huge population. It's still, the reach is like, how many people in the rural areas have that? No one, maybe one person. Dishwashers are out of still question, what washing machines. So domestic help is the people from the rural areas are coming to the cities, which has always been the case. This domestic help, we were trying to help her. She was pretty young, and she used to work. And we educated her, gave her books and stuff. And, she, we were pretty close to her, and she was pretty close to us. But imagine her salary is, let's just make a number. Maybe her salary is, let's say, 5,000 rupees, which will translate to, how much is that? 70 times.
What's the factor? What's the factor when you divide 5,000 with?
49, around 50. No, if with 70.
70, so like $80, right?
Yeah, it is
$70,
$80. Yeah, which is, again, it's low, but in India, a single person can, you can get meals for still 10
So
bucks
like
a day, like
Oh, yeah.
10 rupees a day. So that is,
less than a buck.
Yeah.
right?
So one rupees is 70 rupees, $1.
Yeah,
So it's
so
like
15 cents,
15 cents,
14
right?
cents a day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not in all cities. Like Mumbai is very expensive. Depends on where
Yeah.
you are, but you can. But that was not the point. The point is, if she was making like getting that $80, whatever 5,000, she wanted to buy a cell phone for 4,500.
Mm-hmm.
So for like $70, right, or something. And we were like, why would you want to do that? That's like you're blowing away in your entire money.
Yep.
And she was like, no, but I really need that cell phone.
That's the thing here, right? That's where I say like education and culture wages in, because in China, if you think about whatever family you talk to, if they get rich or have spare money, that goes to education of their kids. Like, period.
Mm-hmm.
We have been doing that thing for 5,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually the culture thing, making the thing. So if you want to change that, you basically need to tell them like why investment is a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
how do you do investments, and why in long term and short term, like this one is going to benefit you.
Mm-hmm.
You sacrifice a little bit about your life quality, or maybe not,
Mm-hmm.
but in the long run, when you're retired, you have triple
Well,
or 4 times of whatever
exactly.
you earned.
And the education is not going to let
But
you
it's not
do.
even like in the developing country, even here,
Mm-hmm.
if you talk to people about investment, how many people will actually understand
Yeah.
and accept that idea?
Yeah.
Most of the thing will be more about like, my dad told me to do this. He did fine, so I'm going to do the same thing.
A lot of the credit card debt, which has been now, passed on to the developing countries,
Yeah.
like because credit card is a thing. So everything is bought with plastic money. So people are spending more than what they earn based on credit cards,
But
right?
it's happening everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's basically the American model duplicated to
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the countries.
yeah,
but
yeah.
Now it's just like, do you have that supply of
Exactly.
productivity
Yeah.
to supply those kind of lifestyle?
Mhm,
But
mhm.
I can totally see like that's why I say like education is probably the most important thing. You just tell people how to define a healthy life.
And education, not just, I feel like it's not just like the proper sense, not just like a degree education, right?
No. It's more about
Every
how to define.
how to do,
a
yeah,
life.
exactly. Like, which will be like, okay, the school you went to, the kind of company you're keeping, the what family you. I feel like all of that encompasses. It's a very broad term of education,
Yeah.
not just like, oh, I got an A in college. Well, that
No,
doesn't
no,
do
no.
much. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and that up to a certain point, you can only do so much as
Yeah,
an institution.
yeah,
After
yeah.
that, it will be purely self-reflection.
Exactly.
So if you can make people who respect scholars,
Mm-hmm.
respect knowledge,
Mhm.
and teach them a little bit how to do self-reflections
Mm-hmm.
to be better,
Mm-hmm.
that would be my ideal world. Like, but I haven't seen anywhere.
No, no. And, to reflect and change your behavior, which I see like, with things, oh, did I believe that before, or did I do things that way? Yes. At one point, I realized that was not the way, and I changed my behavior. My shameful? No. People change and learn. But it's just that thing of like, no, I'm just going to, I used to do that 10 years ago, I'm going to do the same thing 10 years from now. Although my information set has changed, but apparently we don't want to learn from it.
The problem here is like, how much do you believe human? Like, how much behavior of human behavior you think is rational?
Yeah. Oh, well, that has been so much, turned. That was so simplistic an assumption, right?
Yeah.
It still works to a great extent, but it doesn't work in so many cases. That's where behavioral economics and in this heterodox field. So I work more. I have some work in mainstream economics. Mainstream is just the neoclassical investment, like growth and stuff. But heterodox is like this role of culture, role of institutions, psychology. That's where behavioral. There was. I'll send you the talk if you're interested. It's on TED.
Uh-huh.
And then this person is talking about visions, right? Like you have there were two, I'm forgetting what, like there were like two objects of different, one more like lengthwise long, and the other one was like widthwise. And if you look at them, you will think that the length one is longer than
you're
the.
saying like they have the same shape.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It's a
vision thing.
Yeah.
That, and then some color things, like you think that is brown, but actually that's yellow. And he makes a point, like, vision is a huge part of our brain.
Yep.
Right? So we devote a lot of like, it's, if we are making these mistakes, think about other things like financial decisions, investment decisions, and other decisions. There we are not experts. So what kind of mistakes we might be making?
That's why like a big part of our behavior is actually controlled by unconscious.
Yeah.
We think we have a reason, but what's really happening is actually you do the action first, then you let the brain actually regulate. Why did I do that? Oh, I need to come up with a story to convince myself
to justify.
I'm still sane. So
Or someone else is making a decision for you, but you are thinking of choosing. Like, for example, there was a study, I feel like, about food in cafeteria.
yeah,
Maybe you know about
you
it.
change the order of the thing. Yeah. That's really interesting because if you learn more, go more and more into psychology, you will start to feel like, yeah, you think you are individual, autonomous individual, but actually a large part, more than 90% of your behavior is controlled by something you don't realize. And another interesting thing is actually human has two brains, the left one and the right one. They don't have to agree with each other.
Yeah.
The problem here is like you only hear the left one because that's the only one can talk. So people did I don't know how they did it, but it's a very interesting experiment. That is like they they block your, I think, right eye. So your left eye is connected to your right brain. And then they start to develop a way for the left eye to look at different letters to tell what the right brain want. And they take a totally normal people and just ask, what do you want to be? He says, I want to be a craftsman. Okay, that's what your left brain wants because that's the one talks. They block this one and use the letter. That right brain says, I want to be a racer. So actually you have those, you constantly have those kind of conflicts between these two. Now all you need to do is just like, you need to think about a lot of actions is done without you noticing, like driving. You don't notice until something's wrong.
Wrong. Yep.
Right. Your prediction doesn't match the real thing. So that's when your left conscious brain actually start to interfere, which definitely requires a lot of more resources than just doing the automatic model. Right.
Exactly.
So a lot of things you took for granted, but the moment you become aware, the whole different brain takes over. Do it, and now it's going to push to your behavior if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And then eventually you change your behavior in this way. So that's exactly what I think the behavior economics is trying to do. But a lot of the effort has been done on regulating people's unconscious behaviors, instead of like the conscious one.
Right.
Right. In economics, a big assumption you assume is actually in the market. Everybody is informed.
Yeah.
Rational.
No.
Not at all. If you think about it, otherwise you won't need any public relationship.
Exactly.
Or ads.
And I think that this happens at, how the funny saying is like even the left of America is not left. And after that's I think in another interesting political spectrum, like even in India is pretty right now, but still like what does right mean in India? Although I think now it is the same, but anyway, it's there was an interesting talk. He on TED again. He's also a behavioral economist, but behavioral development more. He was talking about that. I think we do great in solving everything, but not the last mile. So he calls it the last mile problem. So the rest of it, like we are great at. I'll give you an example. Great at technology. We are great at figuring out what policies to help. So, for example, diarrhea, right? Killed so many people in Africa, in Asia, India, thousand people. The solution, very simple. What is it? It's just the oral rehydration with salt and minerals and stuff, right? And it's inexpensive. So the moment it was discovered, a huge invention that was passed on, you can give it just for free. The government doesn't need to spend some money, saves millions of kids, life of kids, right? It's more vulnerable for kids. He figured that in many Indian villages, it's still, so the diarrhea death rate went down from 25% to 6%. Huge change, right? Like that's a huge development, but still 6%. And then it became flat. It was not growing down further. So that's what he was calling like the last mile, like what was happening. That's where behavioral economics comes in. Very interestingly, you don't put water in a leaky bucket. The women were reducing the consumption of water by their kids once they were having diarrhea, which is exactly opposite of what you're supposed to do. And what was the mindset? The mindset is like, if I have a leaky bucket, do I put more water in it? No, I put less water in it. So he was like, it does make sense, only it doesn't make sense in this case.
a lot of people don't connect a lot of things to think together.
Yeah, yeah,
right? There are
yeah.
certain variables I can only have my attention to the current case.
Yeah.
And then everything else is just like which is my priority in my mind, not like rationally, but
Yeah.
just like whichever I was trained longer.
And that's where the lack of education of the females comes in, right? Like they didn't really know that how is ORS, like, or that is supposed to, that's exactly what you need. So that's the model that doesn't exactly work in this case.
Yeah, but that's a constant battle with human beings because
Yeah.
even with the students here, like you tell them what's right, they accept that's right. How many people can actually do it to extend until you have some kind of fundamental change because you just accumulated so much quantitative changes, right? That's difficult. Have you been following the work by the Nobel laureate this year or last year?
And this year,
The three, who did study in India. Is the TED Talk related to that? Because it sounds really similar.
Yeah, they do a lot of like what is called a randomized control trial.
Yeah.
So for which, so it's kind of setting up like a lab in the human world and then creating a treatment and control group. But for the treatment group, you tweak something. You give them, so let's say you give an allocation of money to a group of people and see how they behave, and you don't do that for the control group. And that so yeah, I have followed some work, not a whole lot, but they have some very interesting, of course, in India, a lot of work. One was by Dufflo, I remember. Work was in Indian villages. She found huge dropout rates by females. And again, that goes back to
education.
education,
Okay.
yeah, from school. And they immediately, our mind went, but that's where the families must be. It's the bias. And she found that was not the case. So, so many things to just be like, we cannot just always think in the one direction. She found actually those schools, or I don't remember if it was one particular school or a few schools, had just male restrooms, no female restrooms. So that was problematic to begin with. Second, but when they were hitting puberty and, and menstruation and all of that, then it became even a greater problem. So they were dropping out at that point because hygiene became a huge issue.
That totally makes sense. Yeah.
So this was like, they actually built that, the female thing. And I think then the rates went up, the enrollment.
That's another typical example of last mile thing, right? Because if you just focus on research paper,
Yeah.
you publish something, you do a hypothesis, you don't test it, you don't actually make sure to see it worked, find the thing and do a follow-up study.
Right.
Or like follow-up construction to make sure that thing's solved. So that's actually why I like this kind of research a lot because, now you're actually really talking about making an impact in the world.
Impact in the world, yeah.
But of course, in the academy, they're not too hot about that. There's nothing new about your methodology. It's
Right.
just controlled experiment.
Exactly.
Right, so that's interesting. That's actually a very interesting illusion because I just heard a podcast and there was a quote I had from there was, science doesn't tell you the answer. It just reduces the uncertainty. So even if you think, naturally this should make sense because I did this one first, this one second, and if I do the first, the second will always happen.
Yeah,
Does it make it a causation?
exactly.
Even if you kind of reproduce it 100 times, now you need to really think about, we thought Newton's second law was true.
Yeah.
Now with all the development, so actually it's not the case. You have an illusion of causation.
Yeah.
And that's what we're good at with our brain because you see something happen first, you see something happen second, automatically you think that's it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's very interesting. I actually read a book recommended by Professor Tasha Mashik. That's why I'm aware of a lot of things you talk about in psychology.
Okay, yeah.
And there was a big thing there was you have a lot of illusions about you understand stuff, like illusion of knowledge. You ask people. There was a very interesting experiment they did. Is like how many people are familiar with a bike? Oh, everybody raised their hand. Okay, take a paper, draw a bike. And then they found you are missing like 25 stuff. Like, do you know where the chain is? Do you know how many chains you have?
Yeah.
Right, where the panels are, how the brake works, and everything. If you're like, oh, I know it, you ask one question, two questions, three question, they get stuck.
Right.
They also actually stop random people on the street, just say, hey, why the sky is blue? Do you know why the sky is blue? Everybody say, wow, of course I know why the sky is blue. And then you ask them why, because the ocean is blue. and why? And after that, they become mad. It's like, I saw the sky every day.
Yeah.
Now you're telling me I don't know how sky works,
But,
and turns out you don't. Right, so that's actually the interesting thing about how to do scientific study.
Exactly.
With the right attitude.
Yeah.
Right? Just like the last mile thing really is a really good add up to
to existing. And I think I have more hope because of definitely economic development is doing it, that they are incorporating, or they are like um, mixing is not the word, but like merging, like taking from political science, taking from anthropology, taking from sociology, because that's it does span, like we have to understand history, right? So there are like studies which actually made me interested in my dissertation by there's economics called Asimoglu. Okay, he and two other people, they did this huge studies on institutions, but institutional legacy, like institutions which were set up during the colonial era, like the court system, the whether you establish property rights or you establish like tax code, everything. So 300, 400, 500, or even more years ago, that is persisting still. And why? Because they are hard to change. It's like a huge cost to change it. If it's complex, like, oh, we might just as well. But that shapes the development. Two countries, different institutions set up, and they went on different paths. So one example is they talk about malaria. One of the explanations of, like, for example, countries like India and stuff with tropical climates, and countries in Africa, high rates of malaria, the settlers couldn't, the colonial settlers couldn't settle there in large numbers because they were dying, right? They couldn't adopt. So they instead went to countries more like to settle in large numbers, which was like, for example, Australia and stuff. And they built more productive institutions. Productive institutions, things like, which if you invest something, the investor is protected, you have good court system, you have checks and balances. But the other places, they built more extractive institutions. Like, it will be easy to extract. The powerful can always extract from the poor. And the two countries persisted in their institutions. And then years later, they are on different tracks. So that's one. I'm pretty sure there are tons of explanations why that happened. But that's one. So that's like history. They are using history to incorporate that in the economic analysis.
So everything has a cause.
Yeah.
And also make you wonder, did they do it consciously? When they set up the institution, they know what's going to happen
exactly
within 400 or 500 years.
But I think that point, they were just looking at their benefit as like, oh, I'm going to stay here longer, so I'm going to use stuff which helps me, like, but here I can just extract and loot, and I don't have to care about it.
Which naturally lead to two consequences. And the consequences got amplified by time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting, yeah.
They have two papers like that. That is one, and they also call the other paper Reversal of Fortune, which is like, because India used to be a very rich country, so that's how they term it. India is one, but other examples like Reversal of Fortune, like how did it get reversed?
Is this like a study area called like historical economics?
This will be actually called like institutional economics and economic development. So because they are saying that these are the institutions which were, again, we devised them, but years ago, we means the settlers here, and that shaped the path of how these countries grew economically.
But even within economics, you have so many different diverse and very narrow study fields. How do you combine all of them and start making policies or economic decisions for the government? How does the process work? I'm constantly like, say, how can you not be intimidated by, maybe I just saw this from behavioral perspective, but didn't consider history or anything?
No, I think that's a great question. And I think it is important that we speak to each other, right? And I think sometimes we don't, which is a problem. But like, someone who is studying labor market, but that labor market implications has important implications for economic development. Economic development, someone who is studying health, that has important implications. So it is, and I think there are actually quite a bit of merge. Like, this person will be a health economist with economic development focus. This will be a labor economics with economic development focus. This is a person who is more doing macro, but that is more to the macro, like, the business cycle stuff. So that is a bit different policy area. So you can maybe divide that a little bit. But I would say maybe when, say, World Bank is implementing policies, World Bank does a lot of development assistance-wise stuff, right? They definitely are incorporating a lot of views of the health economists the labor, those fields for sure come in.
Yeah.
In general, applied micro fields, right?
I kind of feel the same way with the mathematics. It's like you talk to a person, not like big researchers, but like normal people who study graph theories. They basically know very shallow about everything else, right? But very deep in one direction. Up to a certain point, I feel like that for me is almost like an obstacle compared to like advantage.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you see so many, especially mathematics is probably not a good idea, but a good example. But for economics, right? You see so many correlations.
Exactly.
But maybe with all the 7, 8 observable variables, there is one latent variable which is the root cause
Yeah.
of everything, and without merging all the field, you will never see it.
No, I know. I'm pretty sure when they are the policy part, it's like all these experts are coming together,
Yeah.
and to some
From a
extent,
team.
yeah, they are doing that. But in general, also, I think I have more hope for the field because it is more merging. Like you find more interdisciplinary conferences. Interdisciplinary, I mean, among the fields of just economics, right?
Yep.
You have more collaborations across people who are in different fields because you find like, okay, well, I know exactly about labor market decisions, but what is happening for the gender part? So so that kind of stuffs are happening more. Hopefully we will move more in that direction.
Yeah, that sounds really cool because now you, even as a student who studied this, like if you could know everything
Yeah,
up to a certain level, that would be where you start.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
So we talk a lot about economic
Economic.
developments. Can you give us your personal assessment of how good the global, because you also do international economics, right? How good the economics is going right now, and that's a very that's why I say personal summarization on like how sustainable is our current economic system global wide, because I kind of feel like everybody's trying to duplicate the same kind of model, right?
Yeah. I don't know what to say to that because I feel like things will need to change a little bit. The current one is not sustainable, and as for the one definite reason is we have become more polarized.
In terms of
People
different country,
and within country too.
so the richer and the poor.
And political views, economic status, everything, I would say, a lot of factors, and people are sticking to their own views. We don't necessarily talk to each other. There are no conversations happening, and then accordingly, whoever want to please that group of people, they are continuing to do that, and I think that's problematic for a country to progress, right? Like we have to have conversations. We have to have the business cycles will always go on, but I feel like for example, I mean, US is doing good now, but it will head towards the downfall.
Mathematically, it's not sustainable. So
No.
whatever.
And then the policies, of course, like dampening policies don't help. India had many policies which didn't help India in recent periods, so it's seeing the impacts. These usually move with a lag, like it doesn't happen immediately. That's what also sometimes people fail to understand, that
It's also hard to, even if it happened, it's hard to go back 20 years or 10 years and see which one caused this.
Exactly. Or
Right.
even 5 years ago. Like sometimes people think that what was done 3 years ago, we might see the impact now.
Yeah.
Like, which is happening for the US, which is happening for a lot of other countries. But people don't know that. They think it's happening right now, which is so. Yeah, I mean, globally, who knows? I have hope for, like, for example, I think some of the smaller countries are actually doing much better, right? Like, the Central American countries. I mean, some of them have a lot of political instability going on stuff, but Costa Rica and stuff, like, I show these graphs to my kids, my students, huh?
When you say people are doing better, you mean like
Like
the country
in-
are doing better, people
yeah.
are happier?
Happier, and also like health indicators wise, health infrastructure, education wise, that they're doing more out of the resources they have. They don't have, like, they're not poor, but they're able to gain more out of this. so whatever, like they're doing steps to like maybe caring about the environment and all of that. So I don't know, but those are small countries which don't have much power, influence over the say in the world. So I don't know how much that.
And also they are the followers because some country has done it before. Now we just need to try to imitate, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The leading
yeah.
countries need to find out a way to carry everybody forward.
And especially the ones with the yeah, like the big players, right? Like, with a lot of people. That means because there is a lot of, so India, China, US, and definitely some European country. I mean, we need to, but I'm not so worried about the business cycles will always continue. Like we will always, like, as you said,
long-term cycle,
shorter cycles. It's more like, I think what worries me is that these getting polarized, like, like just in terms of everything, whether it be wealth and whether it be conversation, political views, all that stuff. We need to be able to talk to each other. It can get frustrating in the sense that, okay, I'm not. Yeah.
Otherwise, no discussion can be.
Exactly.
Right.
But it has to be complex. And that's what I try to. I know the human psyche doesn't want to go there. Like my students, as I was saying, coming back, that what is the answer? What is the answer? I'm like, I will leave you with a lot of questions in your mind. I don't have the answer, right? I will show you that all of this has happened with research, but that's how it progresses. We don't know we know better, like, poverty has gone down, but then income inequality is to some extent a problem. What is causing that? So we know a lot of answers, but yet new ones have come up. So I'm going to give you all that information, but there will be new questions. If we solved everything, then I don't know.
That's the world.
Yeah.
From now, we just repeat.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know. I don't think we will ever will. But for that, complex conversations need to happen.
Especially for the younger generations, right?
Yeah,
For the
like,
students.
and a lot of areas of gray. Like, it's not black or white. It's not all good, all bad. We have a huge area of gray, and we need to talk about it. Like, what is happening? And I think that's where all countries operate.
Interesting. So it's almost like when you have a imaginary ideal utopia versus the real world. Right? It's always not what you think it is,
And
you need to deal with it.
Exactly. And also, like, how our perceptions, like we all do that. We talk about, like, oh, those people in that country X. It's like, what do you mean? Those people, like everyone in that country X?
Group identities, yeah.
Yeah, right. And we definitely box people in that. We are all doing that. And then, well, that also is in turn defining how we are behaving.
So
right?
I think I have an interesting view on this. I almost feel like all the group things, we started things at group level because of the development of statistics. Just like,
what do you mean? Like,
it's like you don't care, you don't study individuals. It's always like 30 samples.
Yeah.
Right? The moment you do that, you lose the human side of it. Right? Every time you see an average, it tells you some story, it tells you a simplified story. So I almost feel like the reason we talk about so much about country X right now is because we trust the statistics so much.
Yeah. That's a good point. And, like, it's also, I feel like in a very, not in a related context, somewhat, I feel like at least for economics for sure, I don't know, how all publications depend on significance of the results.
P-value, yeah.
P-value. I feel like insignificance of the results should also be important contributions. Well, maybe if someone from Harvard can publish that, I cannot, but I feel like insignificance is a story. I thought X will significantly impact Y. It doesn't. Well, why don't we need to know that? But you can never publish the paper.
Yeah, I mean, there are constant debating about p-values, right? Every few years, people sign something and just send to an institute and say we need to abandon p-value at least 0.05 permanently. But,
I didn't know that discussion was going on.
Yeah, there are several discussions going on. I think the first one was in psychology. It's just like, hey, anything that is with a p-value less than 0.05, that shows significance. We should abandon that. It's just like it doesn't tell a story at all. Right, even the people who develop p-value themselves actually say, hey, this thing has limitations, but now we just trust it so much. I almost feel like, for me, for some things, I tend to like to think it in a scientific way, mathematical way. For some things, I just feel like the human side could never or shouldn't be done in this way.
Yeah.
But now you try to reinforce scientific method, research method on individuals. That's almost like, who am I?
Yeah.
Am I a 0.05% percent happy person.
Yeah, yeah,
It
exactly.
doesn't make sense. It's just me. Like
Exactly.
I'm happy or I'm not happy.
And I am an
right?
individual. I mean, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's a really interesting thing to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But with just talking with you, I can feel like how frustrated your students get, just with all this stuff. Like even if you did something, you don't know when the impact is gonna come. You don't know how to assess it. Even you assess it, maybe nothing happened.
Yeah,
How do you know it's because of you?
yeah, yeah.
So
And
yeah,
and they get. I guess I should be better in my future classes to convey that. But I think I've tried a lot. They don't understand the. Like you have economic models which look so ridiculous now because it was too simplistic. Any model like, oh, you set up like this economy, you consider just two groups of people, I don't know, and a farmer and a capitalist, an investor or something like that. So it's too simplistic. And then you not negate the model, but you discuss why, criticize, like why it didn't work. Okay, so then we build on the next model. So they keep asking me, why did we have to study that? Because I was like, because, if it, yeah, if it failed, why are we studying that, right? And I was like, because you took important lessons from there, maybe the set of the model, you borrowed some of it to build on it what failed. So it's still setting up the path, right? I faced that a lot in this semester more. Like, why are we learning about all of this when all of them had criticisms, like drawbacks? I was like, because that's how we learned.